Good evening. Welcome to the August 1st, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. Call the roll, please.
Bauman, Domes,
Present.
Bacon, Gates, Hogalter,
Here.
Iverson, Kibler,
Here.
Leiter, Longton,
Here.
Menham,
Here.
Nesdal, Offerdahl,
Here.
and Pontanila.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
We have a quorum. All right, with that, let's stand for the pledges of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, moving on, we'll go to agenda item number 4, approval of the July 11th, 2023 regular meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, so we got a motion to approve by Commissioner Holkalter and second by Commissioner Kibler. Any discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion, we'll close the discussion and call the roll.
Domes,
Right. Here. Yes.
Hogalter,
Yes.
Kibler,
Yes.
Longton,
Yes.
Menham,
Yes.
Offerdahl,
Yes.
and Pontanila.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 5. We're all pretty familiar with this one. It's a continued from June 6th. Was it continued from July 11th, right? Both June 6th and July 11th on the zoning map, PUD on Citizens Alley. So it's a public hearing request by Askell Group, owner of a zoning map amendment from CBD, Central Business District, to C2, General Commercial District to CBD. So with that, we'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chairman Offerdahl, members of the commission. So likely for the third and final time, staff's recommendation is just to table this item to Wednesday, September 6th at 5:30 p.m. at City Council chambers.
Okay. With that, we'll leave the public hearing open on this so that we'll continue with a motion from one of the commissioners here.
I move to open the public hearing or to table the motion.
Table the motion is what we'd be looking for. The public hearing's still open from June 6th, so this is just continued open public hearing
Okay,
while we
I
allow the participants.
move to table the motion.
I'll second.
Second from Menham.
Yes.
Motion by Kibler, second by Menham. Okay, any discussion?
Point of clarification. So when the item's tabled, does that mean to Wednesday, September 6th, Planning Commission meeting at 5:30 p.m. in City Hall Council chambers?
That's what I meant. Yes.
As well as I.
Thank you for the clarification. Any discussion? Okay, with that, then we'll move on to agenda item number 6. Oh, we need roll call, I'm sorry. Call the roll.
Domes,
Yes.
Hogalter,
Yes.
Kibler,
Yes.
Longton,
Yes.
Menham,
Yes.
Offerdahl,
Yes.
and Pontanila.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 6, case 2023-801, zoning map amendment, West Hills Second Edition. Public hearing request by Wade Hust, owner of a zoning map amendment from R1 Single Family Residential to RR Rural Residential District for the purpose of constructing a third outbuilding. That, we'll turn it over to staff for findings and report.
Thank you, Chairman Offerdahl, members of the commission. So the subject property is bound in white. The 600-foot notification boundary is noted in pink. The subject property is located in northwest Minot, west Minot, west of the 83 bypass near the boundary of city limits. The subject property is a single-family home in a residential neighborhood comprised of homes located on lots predominantly between 2 and 3 acres. It's anywhere from 2 to 7.5 acres in that subdivision. Here's the applicant's letter of intent, which can be found in staff's written report as Exhibit 2. The applicant is requesting a rezone from R1 single-family residential to RR rural residential, specifically to be able to construct a third accessory structure to be used for storage. So with the current zoning of R1, the maximum number of accessory structures allowed is 2, and under an RR rural residential zone, the maximum is increased to 3. The regulations for properties zoned R1 are slightly higher in their intensity when compared to properties zoned RR, though R1 and RR zones have been found to be generally harmonious when located adjacent to one another. Also keep in mind that R1 is by and large intended to be anywhere from 4 to 8 units per acre within the zoning code by definition. And so it's really catered towards urban residential development as opposed to rural residential development. And this fact is largely what prompted staff and broader discussions with the future land use map to declare certain areas appropriate for rural residential on the future land use when we went through the comprehensive planning process. So with that, the request to rezone aligns with the 2040 comp plan. So this area has been designated as rural residential in the future land use, and the requested zone does align with the future land use map. So the photo on the left facing south depicts some of the neighboring properties, and the photo on the right facing northwest shows the subject property. And so here's the general descriptions that I referred to a little bit with R1. So R1 single-family residential, single-family dwellings is the primary use. R1 district falls within low-density res land use categories with the density range of 4 to 8 dwelling units per acre. Rural residential, the principal use of the land shall be for low-density, large lot residential with limited equine husbandry. So some notable differences between RR and R1 as they apply to the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So R1 would be up to 2 accessory buildings permitted. RR, as mentioned earlier, up to 3 accessory buildings are permitted. Minimum lot size in R1 is 2 acres in the ETJ. 7,500 square foot should this property be annexed in the future, 9,500 on corner lots. Minimum lot size is 2 acres in rural residential. Animal husbandry is prohibited in R1, and then there's limited animal husbandry permitted with 100-foot setbacks for related structures. Standard residential fencing materials would be appropriate in the R1 single-family residential. That's your vinyl, chain link wood. Rural residential, due to the animal husbandry, you'd also find barbed wire, concertina wire, and electric fencing. So here's the findings of fact. They can be found in staff's written report. And staff is recommending the Planning Commission adopt staff finding of fact and recommend approval to City Council with no conditions. And so I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for city staff?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Van Dyke, the property in question is an R1 now, right? As is the neighborhood it's in?
Chairman Offerdahl, Commissioner Kibler, yes, that's correct.
And the intention is to just change that one property from an R1 to an RR?
Yes, that's correct, as that's the one that's presented before Planning Commission. I think staff, if there was broad turnout and a request by the broader subdivision to change the zone, then the city potentially could do a city-initiated rezone for the entirety of it. But generally, we don't do that unless there's either consensus or near consensus with those city-initiated rezones.
How typical is it for this commission or your office to designate a new zone for one property that's part of a group of other like properties?
I would say every single time there's a zoning map amendment request, there's a potential for that to occur. And then that is why we have the future land use, because that informs the future on how we want to see development or redevelopment, or lack thereof in this case, occur over time.
In that map that was just shown, it looked like the future development saw that big field to the north as being a residential neighborhood.
Correct, I believe.
Was that
Let me
correct?
pull that back up. Yes. That would be suburban residential to the north. And there's quite a bit of a topographical slope off of that northern property boundary down to that, down to the property to the north.
Okay, there's a big dip
Yeah.
down. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anybody in attendance that wishes to speak on behalf of this agenda item? Okay. Anybody that wishes to speak on behalf? Okay, anybody that wishes to speak in opposition of this agenda item? Please step forward. If you could you state your name and your address and also sign the little sheet there? I hope there's a pen up there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Cindy Sessions. I am a neighbor of Mr. Hughes. I wrote a letter in opposition to the zoning change, and I'd like to read that, please. We are extremely opposed to allowing zoning to change from R1 to RR, even for a single residence. If one is approved, it opens a door for others to follow. We were one of the first families to build in this neighborhood back in 2008. We bought the land because it was zoned R1. We built this home with the intention of it being our last and final home after serving at Minot Air Force Base, electing to be stationed here, and raising our 3 children here. We retired in Minot with the intention of this investment being our forever home, in large part due to what we believed at the time to be our ideal location, just on the outskirts of the city, within the 2-mile jurisdiction to Minot, with a little bit of space, but with the same high R1 zoning standards. The staff report states that the regulations for R1 are slightly higher in their intensity when compared to RR. We bought the land, our small 3 acres, at optimal cost, and for the last 15 years have invested heavily in landscaping and other improvements to make it a wonderful home and to contribute to the aesthetic of the neighborhood and the value of surrounding properties. There are 36 homes in this neighborhood. All of the homeowners knowingly, willingly, and trustingly invested in this R1 residential neighborhood, including Mr. Hughes, who as a builder understood better than most the zoning regulations. To change any of these R1 properties to RR would in fact destroy the neighborhood as it stands and certainly diminish its appeal, aesthetics, and ideal family and kid-friendly atmosphere. The staff report also erroneously indicated that there are few differences between the zones. There are major differences between the zones. The staff report requires that the proposed zoning map amendment to RR, they stated that it would not substantially diminish the condition or value of the property in the vicinity, and that they found no evidence that the zoning map amendment to RR would diminish the condition or value of the property. I don't understand what staff bases this on. We have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in our home, and therefore the neighborhood, and risk loss of investment, not to mention diminished quality of residential zoning standards, which quickly equates to quality of life, not just for us, but for the entire neighborhood. There is no information on where on his site Mr. Hughes plans to build his 30-foot by 24-foot third outbuilding, the shape or structure of it, nor what type of building materials he plans to use. To state that it would not substantially diminish the condition or value of the property in the vicinity is premature and false. The staff report also bases justification on its approval in the 2040 Comprehensive Plan Future Land Use Map. 2040, 17 years down the road. And also, as property owners, we were never notified that this area was to be changed to RR. An RR zoning would allow rabbits, chickens, and horses. It would also allow the use of electric and barbed wire and concertina wire fencing. This alone would be an immediate and detrimental addition to this neighborhood. Not only would neighboring homeowners lose investment value and have a negative resale value, it would be a terrible, violent, and possibly fatal threat to the children of the neighborhood. The statement that staff finds no evidence that the zoning map amendment to RR will diminish the condition or value of the property is incredibly wrong. The zoning change from R1 to RR will cause irreparable damage to his immediate neighbors and to this entire R1 community. When we purchased our land, we were given a copy of the protective covenants that went with this land. The protective covenants prohibited animals. In good faith, we purchased this land knowing that it was zoned R1 and that it had additional protective covenants. We strongly urge the council to recommend disapproval of this request and keep the zoning standard R1, the higher zoning standard, and therefore the higher quality of life for this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious when you say that we are extremely opposed. Did you query the neighborhood? Okay.
Myself and my husband as property owners.
And you live right contiguous or adjacent to this property?
Would you mind putting up the map?
My last question just simply would be, how will the construction of a 30 by 20 foot building adversely affect the neighborhood?
It's not just the construction of the building. It is the change in the zoning, which Mr. Hughes is requesting.
Thank you.
And then where was your house located on this map up here?
Are on the right-hand side, the third down on the right.
Okay. And you said you didn't get this notification on the 600?
We got this notification. We were never notified of the future land use map that was changing our area from R1 to RR.
Okay. Thank you.
And I guess I need to add, we in the 600-foot area are the only, how many property owners? A few. And none of the other ones even know that this is occurring.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody else wish to speak in opposition or for this agenda item? Yes, sir. Come on up. Please, if you can, write your name and your address down there and then introduce yourself. That'd be greatly appreciated.
The reason I was going to be doing this third building is because a lot of people in the neighborhood have boats. I think the Sessions have boats laying around, other stuff. It's kind of an eyesore to the neighborhood. And I thought putting up a building, I could get rid of some of the stuff that I have out. I'd like to get it all underneath buildings that are all kind of the same color scheme, same. You look at my property, it's clean. My buildings are not shabby. They're well built. They're not going anywhere. Also, about the animal thing, I might not be true, but I think you have to have at least 5 to 15 acres if you're within that border of the 2-mile radius of Minot.
Chairman Offerdahl, no, that's not correct. There's just a limited amount that's permitted, and it's based on acreage and then the type of animal. So larger the animal, the fewer you can have per acre is how that's count.
So if we go by the covenants of the properties, there is no horses or anything allowed already in the covenants, which are fairly old at this time. But Yeah, and I got 4 kids and I got cars that I want to get. I got a 30 by 30 shop that I want to get all that stuff out of there and put in this 30 by 24 storage building. So then I can park cars in the garage, get stuff just out of sight so it's not an eyesore to the neighborhood. And you ask all my neighbors, other than the Sessions, I've been a really good neighbor. As far as, being a good neighbor, I've never caused any problems. That's all I got to say. I didn't know about the animal, but I don't know if I can put it in writing that I won't have any animals because I'm in RR now, but I do not plan on having any wildlife livestock or anything like that. So that's all I have to say then.
Can I assume that you're Wade?
Yes,
You're
I'm
the
sorry.
applicant.
Wade
Okay.
Hughes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Just want to make sure. Hey, any questions for Mr. Wade?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just Mr. Moose, just
Wade, if we can get you to come back up. Got a question here. Thank you.
I'm just curious. This business is just this building is just to house your stuff. It's not part of a business enterprise or any sort of private home.
That's correct. He says I'm a builder, but that was I don't do that anymore, so. It would be just for personal use, no business running out of it or anything like that. Cold storage.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Chairman and Mr. Van Dyke, I'm naive about this, but is the only way for a citizen to get permission to add another building is to change the zone, is to rezone it? That's the only way to have that happen?
Question.
Chairman Offerdahl, Commissioner Menham, yes, that at this point, that is what it is. So the goal is to not have numerous accessory structures litter a rear or side yard of a particular property that the actual square footage afforded Mr. Hughes, based on the size of his property, is actually quite substantial. So it's like up to 5% of the total area of his yard can be occupied by accessory structures. So he's got 3 acres. So it's a significant amount, about 6,000 square foot total that he can have as accessory structures. And between, I think it's appropriate amount of accessory structures and size of accessory structure to have them. So rather than have, again, to preserve the character of the neighborhood, have 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9 sheds, I think we all agree that the character of the neighborhood is important, and there's adequate sizing of the structures that allow them to reach their storage needs. So,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, is to sort of follow up on Annette's question. So like exemptions or variances would not work for this structure?
no, Commissioner Offerdahl, Chairman Offerdahl, Commissioner Kibler, no, that would be a use variance.
Yeah.
We could look at tweaking the text of the code, but again, it would be applying to R1. And by and large, you're going to see your R1 in that 4 to 8 lots per acre. That is really a city urbanized lot. I think back in the day, for whatever reason, they decided to go R1 as opposed to RR. But by our current definitions, and I think most of us would agree that a 2 to 3 acre piece of property really is a rural residential piece of property. Glusher Ranch is the most recent approval of anywhere from 2+ acres. That was all done rural residential. This neighborhood is very similar in that, but for whatever reason, they decided to go R1. And when in reality, it has more of the characteristics, at least lot size wise, that you would find in your rural residential neighborhood.
I do have one more question. Is this neighbor, and I don't know who might have the answer, but is this a neighborhood that was built as a neighborhood? Did one contractor build all of these houses, or are these individual houses purchasing the land, getting the architect building the house, or was this a neighborhood per se?
No, it was a
theme?
development, and we bought the lots, and then you could do whatever under a certain square footage of a house, and had to be stick built and things like that.
Okay, everyone built their own home on whatever lot they purchased?
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, Chairman Offerdahl and maybe Mr. Van Dyke. We talk about, I heard land use covenants mentioned. Will those still stay intact even with the rezoning? They're completely separate. Is that correct?
That's great. Chairman Opdahl, Commissioner Fontanilla, yes, that's correct. So the city does not get involved with private covenants. That's ends up being a civil matter. So if the development wanted to enforce those covenants, then they would need to take action through whatever means are spelled out within the covenants themselves. So
Thank you. Any other questions? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. We'll call you back up if we got any more. Anybody else wish to speak for or against this agenda item? Yes, ma'am. Come on up.
Thank you. I just wanted to first, I don't know if Mr. Hughes gave the impression that we are lifelong enemies or anything. I don't know him very well. I'm very good friends with his wife for over a decade. So this pains me to be here in opposition. But again, it is, this zoning will allow animals. It will allow that fencing, that electric fencing, barbed wire fencing. And also, if there are animals, the setback for the animals themselves is only 20 feet away from property lines. So if this one lot is approved, like I said, it opens a door for 36 people to change their zoning. And it changes the entire concept of residential R1 zoning. Thank you.
Any questions? I guess I got one in the 20-foot setback. Is that correct?
Chairman Offerdahl, yes, so it's 100 foot for any structures related to that animal husbandry, and then 20 foot to keep the animals off the property boundary.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody else in the public that would wishes to speak for or against this agenda item? Okay, seeing no questions, seeing nobody coming up to the dais, we will close the public hearing. We'll turn it over to the commissioners for a motion.
I guess I would move to deny this motion. And I believe a person's got their right to do what they want with their property, but this does seem to be a contiguous neighborhood. And I can understand and sort of deeply respect how neighbors feel about this kind of change. And I don't know, I would prefer this kind of change myself, but I do see a contiguous neighborhood here and a bunch of houses that are built the same way, and that it does seem a strange outlier to have one of those houses all of a sudden become a rural house and the rest are R1. So I make the motion to deny in opposition to staff findings of fact.
Okay, we got a motion to deny. We'll need to back that with the second. Okay. Motion to deny, seeing no second, we go back to the original motion on the agenda item for recommended approval. Can I get a motion on the staff recommendation?
I'll make a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Longton. And we'll need a second to back that motion as well. Seeing no second now, I don't even know what to do here. So we don't have a second on that motion either.
Well, I would make a second just to move things along here.
Okay. So a
Get to a
second,
discussion and, have a vote on it.
second by motion by Kibler, Commissioner Kibler. Motion initially by Commissioner Longton.
I get a point of clarification. Does that include adopting staff's findings of fact?
Yes.
The second also follow that, Commissioner Kibler?
Yes.
Okay. Confirmation. Okay. Any discussion on this then? Any additional discussion? All right, seeing none, let's call the roll.
Domes,
No.
Hoggalter,
No.
Kibler,
No.
Longton,
Yes.
Menham,
No.
Offerdahl,
Yes.
Fontanilla,
No.
and motion fails.
Okay, motion fails. Right, so then we need to go back to a motion for a recommendation to pass on to the city staff, so, or city council, I'm sorry, thank you. So do you want to go back to your original motion, Commissioner Kibler?
Yeah, I'll go back to that motion to deny in opposition to staff findings of fact based on the reasons that I articulated earlier. I do think that maybe some accommodation could be made with neighbors, and I would like to see a greater turnout of neighbors since it is a neighborhood. We're left in a position to make judgments based on two people's, opinions about this, but I would make the motion to deny.
Any second on that?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Hochhalter. Okay, any discussion? Okay, call the roll.
Domes,
Yes.
Hoggalter,
Yes.
Kibler,
Yes.
Longton,
No.
Menham,
Yes.
Offerdahl,
No.
Fontanilla,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, motion carries. Also want to remind you that this is just a recommendation that we're sending to city council. So you'll also have the opportunity to go speak to city council too if you guys don't agree with our recommendation. Just like to pass that along. So, thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 7, case 2023-808-02, future land use amendment and preliminary plat, Highlander Estates, 6th edition, public hearing request by Ackerman Surveying, representing HL Development LLC, owner for a zoning map amendment from R2 two-family residential district and R3 multiple residential district to GM General Mixed Use District, C2. With that, we'll turn it over to city staff for findings and fact.
Thank you, Chairman Offerdahl, members of the commission. So the subject properties are in the southwest area of the city, off of 37th Avenue Southwest, near the new Trinity Hospital and just north of the Trax development. The application includes platting the backbone of the transportation network, so collector and arterial road extensions, and several lots that may or may not be further subdivided in the future. So the properties are currently zoned R3, which is the equivalent to RM, medium density residential, and also R2, two-family residential district. The request stems from significant changes to the southwest area of Minot since the property was originally platted in 2012. The area has developed into a much higher intensity than what it was originally conceived. Obviously, Trinity Hospital is now open there. The Trax development, the 7 stories that are just to the south of part of this development. And then, as a reminder, last month, we evaluated the 5th edition. This is the 6th edition. I would clearly guess that you'll receive a 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th editions. Overall, as they continue to have plans for the remainder of the property that is owned by the applicant. This application does include a future land use map amendment to include general commercial, mixed-use center, and urban residential rather than entirely urban residential. So that's the orange color that you see. That's all urban residential. And I kind of just highlighted some basic, what the proposed coloring is going to be. So everything west of 23rd Street Southwest, that's going to be the area of mixed-use center, should this be approved. The lots fronting 35th Avenue Southwest would be general commercial, and then what would be remaining urban residential is that Lot 1, Block 2, to the northeast side of the proposed area or proposed development. I just want to point out these temporary cul-de-sacs that are noted in this plat. It's bringing attention to them. So there's an unnamed road extension off of 35th Avenue Southwest. That's on the right side of the screen. And then there's a temporary cul-de-sac off of 23rd Street Southwest. So a lot of this, and knowing and based on conversations with the developer, there's quite an extensive list of conditions and spelling things out because they will be rolled into a development agreement at some point. I guess I'll just say now, we've already been in discussions with the developer with regard to these concepts, and they're amenable to the conditions, as far as I'm aware from previous discussions. Here's just a generalized plan. I bounded it in black. That's the area of the subject property. As of now, there is some other future phases to the north, but you can disregard those. Again, all of this is just very preliminary. It's a proof of concept to show that certain structure sizes and parking areas and setbacks and so on and so forth can be accommodated by the lots that are being proposed. But this is generally what the vision of the property owner is as of today. And so they're creating these lots to accommodate this type of development. Here's some site photos. So facing south, you can see the field. Facing northeast, you can see the ongoing development of the tracks there. So here's the findings of fact. As I mentioned, I'll go over in more detail what the conditions of approval are. Otherwise, the Planning Commission has the authority to recommend approval with or without conditions or recommend denial to City Council. So there's a 3 or 4 part with an 8 part and a 3 part afterward. So I'll just kind of go through these a little bit. So staff's recommending approval. The future land use map amendment is proposed, as I kind of illustrated. Zoning map amendment from the R2 and R3 to accommodate the GMU general mixed use district, C2 general commercial district, and the RM medium density residential district. And then a preliminary plat for Highlander Estates 6th. And the plat is what's subject to the conditions. So a lot of these are pretty basic, but again, understanding that the property owner desires to phase a lot of his property through and redeveloped previously platted lots that at this time don't make sense for his plans. The final plat shall include the necessary right-of-way to accommodate a roundabout at the intersection of 23rd and 35th. Right now, it's just a T-junction intersection, and so given the amount of commercial development in the area, a roundabout is more accommodating to traffic than just a 3-way stop or a 4-way stop. And not as intense as, say, like a signalization. So the final plat shall include the necessary right-of-way to continue 20th Street Southwest northward to connect to 35th, or plat a cul-de-sac on Lot 3, Block 3 to terminate 20th Street Southwest. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to try to go back and forth here as best I possibly can. 20th Street Southwest. If you look in the bottom right of Lot 3, Block 3, See how the right-of-way kind of, it's halfway dedicated on the east side of that. The other half, at least as part of this preliminary plat, is not dedicated. So what we want to see is just that it's not terminating at some half-dedicated right-of-way. We want to at least put a cul-de-sac there if it's not going to go all the way through. Ideally, it would go through and provide that additional connectivity, but at a minimum, we want to see a proper turnaround. And then a financial security shall be provided to the city. This is basic requirement for all plats that involve what will be work in the right-of-way, so the roads, the water, the sewer extension, so on and so forth. Here's the gem. I'll try to really go over this super quick because it is a big block of text, but ultimately there's an existing shared use path that lies west of 23rd Street Southwest, and we want to make sure that that's extended so that we can have our pathway network throughout the city. Sidewalks will be required. And this addresses the termination points of those sidewalks leading into the temporary cul-de-sacs. Like we're specifically stating we don't need sidewalks to bound this temporary cul-de-sac because at some point it will be a throughway road, so they don't need to worry about those sidewalks. Urbanized right-of-way construction for all right-of-ways, so we don't want to see rural roadways. And then, of course, just basic water, sewer, storm sewer, curb and gutter, et cetera. So Lot 1, Block 2 shall not be developed until the necessary right-of-way is dedicated. Okay, so Lot 1, Block 2 is the orange. And so it's the northeast. So it's fine that it's going to be platted. It's going to be a platted lot, but we're going to consider it a super block at this point with the intent to further subdivision, as you saw that it's planned for by the developer. But at this point, we want to make sure that that actually gets re-subdivided to dedicate the necessary right-of-way. Just putting future right-of-way on there is obviously, it's not actually dedicating the right-of-way. We have no ability to prevent, say, like a single-family dwelling occupying Lot 1, Block 2. I mean, it's legitimately could be something that could happen if this plat were to be approved in the rezone and so on. So we just want to make sure that it actually is developed with the proper intensity of the area surrounding it. And so we do expect there to be some further redevelopment. Bear with me as I go back and forth. Traffic study would be required by the city engineer. 23rd Street, this is F, 23rd Street Southwest and 35th Avenue Southwest are collector roadways and are subject to collector roadway design standards and access spacing requirements. And so that's just giving a heads up that we're not going to want to see multiple driveways clustered together because of the speeds and the amount of traffic that are going to be flowing through those roadways, as you can imagine, with the tracks and Trinity and the additional commercial development, general mixed use, so on and so forth. Approach spacing is one of the biggest inhibitors to the flow of traffic. And so we want to make sure that those collectors actually work to accommodate traffic adequately. Lots 4 and 6. So these are the properties to the north that are part of the backbone of this 31st Avenue Southwest and then 23rd Street Southwest. On this image, you can see 31st Avenue Southwest as it extends. It's the far north, outside of the black bounding box there. It's to the north. 31st Avenue Southwest ultimately will continue west to connect to 30th Avenue Southwest. Outside the scope of this image, but nonetheless, we want to make sure that these platted collector, the backbones of what we're doing here actually ties into platted collector and arterial road network in the future. And so all we're saying here is that Lot 4 and 6, which the applicant also owns and has the ability to encumber via this development agreement, is that they would plat their property and designate the proper connection between 23rd Street Southwest and 31st Avenue Southwest. We want to make sure that we're able to carry on those connections. So at the end of the day, it's a very wordy way of saying we want to make sure the road network actually functions, because those temporary cul-de-sacs are inadequate. And then having stub road connections when they can't reach, say, 31st Avenue Southwest does us no good as a community. So we want to make sure that the backbone of that road network is at least platted, and those properties that they retain ownership of presently are not developed in such a way that we can't tie into the backbone of our road network. We just want to make it all function, at least the backbone. So the collectors, the minor arterials, we want to make sure those are, as far as the local road segments that kind of spin off of that minor arterial and collector road network, we're less hung up on at this point because it's really high level. So I believe that was it. So I'll stand for any questions. I know there was a lot of back and forth between the plat and there's a lot of text there, but it is, of course, in the written staff report if you want to mull through that. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for city staff?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Van Dyke, just out of curiosity, because I lived in a neighborhood like this, we agree to the design, the designer and the builder go ahead and create the community. What happens if they don't build that roundabout or that right-of-way according to the expectations of the approved plat? What recourse do we have?
Hey, Nick? So the question is, if the development agreement is not fulfilled, what is the recourse? No, I guess Emily. Either one.
Sorry, we thought you were both looking at us. As he had mentioned, all those things will be outlined in the developer's agreement, and there's a security required, so we would have financial security. So if things were not done as they were approved, the city would have the ability to make those changes using the developer's financial security.
And is that financial security sufficient to cover the costs of roundabouts? And
Yeah, the financial security will be determined based on engineers' cost estimates that'll be provided to us, plus a little bit of an increase to make sure that we are covered.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing no questions for city staff, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody in attendance that wishes to speak on behalf of this agenda item?
Chairman Offdal, Commission members, Rob Berard with Ackerman Surveying on behalf of the developer. He's reviewed the items and is accepting of all staff recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
A lot of pieces to it. We're just trying to bite off a
Yes.
piece at a time. So, actually, we're working on the 7th edition, trying to get into a DRT for that one coming up, which will tackle a lot of these future shown on this one. So.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Anybody in the audience that wishes to speak on behalf or against this or in opposition of this agenda item? Anybody wishes to speak for or against this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and turn it over to commissioners.
Yeah, I'd move to approve based on staff recommendations and all these different subpoints that are included. Second.
Okay, so we got a motion by Commissioner Kibler and a second by Commissioner Domes. Any discussion?
Point of clarification, does that include the findings of fact?
Yeah, that's just right. It's a staff finding of fact.
Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, let's call a roll.
Domes,
Yes.
Hoggalter,
Yes.
Kibler,
Yes.
Longton,
Yes.
Benham,
Yes.
Offerdahl,
Yes.
Pontanila,
Yes.
and motion carries.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 8. Zoning map amendment, Tolberg Shores, second edition, public hearing request by Dan Madler on behalf of BSI MHA LLC representing Northern Lights Property Development. Owner for zoning map amendment from R1 Single Family Residential to RM Medium Density Residential Districts for the purpose of constructing 2 36-unit apartment complexes. With that, we'll turn it over to city staff for findings and report.
Thank you, Chairman Offerdahl, members of the commission. So I'm going to have Brian Billingsley, the Community Development Director, actually handle this one, provide the presentation. As you'll see, Tara Lindquist, Assistant Planner, wrote the staff report. So I actually reside in the nearby vicinity. I'm not within the notification boundary, but close enough. And so just to address any appearance of impropriety, I want to make sure that I step aside and not be involved in the process, at least directly.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, Mr. Van Dyke did bring that to my attention soon after this application was filed, and I agreed that he should step aside in this one. Tara Lindquist did write the staff report. I did review it, and I will be presenting it this evening to the commission. So if we can go to the next slide, John. This is a aerial photograph of the subject site. It's a 7-acre parcel located in northwest Minot. North Highlands Apartments is directly to the east of this site. To the north of the site is the Wyatt apartment complex. And then there's some single-family residential to the south as well. Go to the next slide, John. This is the letter of intent that the applicant, which is Minot Housing Authority and Beyond Shelter, they're proposing to build 2 36-unit apartment complexes on the site. This would be 72 units total. 1, 2, and 3 bedroom unit apartments would be there. All the supporting infrastructure would be included along with parking and garages as well for the tenants. Next slide. And this is the site plan that's proposed. The to the south is the actual apartments that are going to be on the pond side of the property. On the north side are the parking garages for the tenants of the property. There will be 2 access points on the west side. There is access onto 16th Street Northwest. On the east side, there will be access to 27th Avenue Northwest. Next slide, please. This is the zoning map of the neighborhood and the subject site. The subject property is currently zoned R1 single-family residential. We have to the east and to the north, we have some R3, which is a high-density residential. That's where the apartment complexes are located today. To the north, we also have some C1 and C2 at the intersection of 16th Street Northwest and 30th Avenue Northwest. Typically, a medium-density residential project like this is a good fit between commercial and single-family residential. With 72 units proposed here on about 7 acres of land, that's roughly about 10 dwelling units per acre. In the RM district, which they're proposing to rezone to, we have a recommended density level of 6 to 16 dwelling units an acre, so it falls right in the middle. Next slide, please, John. This is the future land use map of the neighborhood, and this is taken from the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which was adopted by the City Council in May. The subject property is planned for urban residential. RM zoning is permitted in the urban residential zone. All 4 corners in the intersection of 30th and 16th Street Northwest is planned for neighborhood commercial, which they're actually zoned for right now for the most part. And then we, of course, have urban residential where the apartment complexes are located to the east and to the north. And then we have some scattered suburban residential lots to the south and west. Next slide, please.
And these are the photos of the site. The photo on the left is facing southbound from the site, and to the north, the photo on the, on the right is facing southwest. So here are the findings of fact that staff is submitting for this request. The property obviously is currently zoned R1, but the comprehensive plan, a future land use map designates the site for urban residential. So RM is a zone that is allowed in the urban residential neighborhood. We've evaluated it with the land development ordinance criteria, and it meets all the criteria from our LDO. And then, of course, we have the authority to hear the case and the Planning Commission has authority to hear the case and provide a recommendation to the council. And that we holding the public hearing, it was notified, everybody was notified, and meets all the requirements of the Century Code and Minot City ordinances. Next slide, John. So our recommendation is follows. We're recommending that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this request to rezone to RM medium density residential with the following conditions. These are conditions that were recommended by our engineering department. The first 5 conditions are typically what you'd find on all new subdivision plats or multifamily developments like this one. Stormwater management plan is required for future development. We're going to require the applicant submit a site plan for the development. They're going to have to pay the connection fees for the development. They have to install sidewalks along both of the roadways. Next slide, John. All utility easements over common utility lines must be recorded. And the 6th recommendation is regarding those 2 driveway locations I identified when I presented the proposed site plan. The driveway on the west side that fronts onto 16th Street must align with 27th Avenue Northwest. And then the driveway on 27th Street on the east side has to be approved by the city engineer. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that that driveway location is not going to interfere with the driveway for the apartment complex across the street. We don't want any situations where we're possibly creating a situation where there could be some accidents at both of those driveways. So with that, I am available to answer your questions. Tom Alexander from the Housing Authority is in attendance as well to answer your questions too.
Okay, any questions for city staff? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Rivera, Mr. Van Dyke, just out of curiosity, and because I'm unclear on this, why wouldn't this be an R3 designated zoning change?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kibler, R3 is now a defunct zone.
Okay,
That's
all right.
yeah. So
okay.
R3 right now goes to RM or RH basically, but in this situation with 10 dwelling units per acre, RM fits the bill perfectly for this site.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for city staff? Okay, seeing none, we'll open up the public hearing. Anybody wish to speak on behalf of this agenda item?
Good evening. I'm Sean Weeks with Ackerman Esvold, representing the applicant. We concur with the findings of the staff report and the recommendations. Thanks for the nice summary, Mr. Billingsley. Any questions? I'm here for you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Weeks? Thank you. Anybody else in attendance wish to speak on behalf or against this agenda item? Anybody wish to speak for or against this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and turn over to commissions for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve staff recommendations and findings of fact.
Second.
Oh, okay. So I got a motion by Commissioner Longton and second by Commissioner Domes. Any discussion? Any discussion? All right, call the roll.
Domes,
Yes.
Hoghalter,
Yes.
Kibler,
Yes.
Longton,
Yes.
Menem,
Yes.
Offerdahl,
Yes.
Pontanila.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 9. Public hearing request by the City of Minot for zoning text amendment to amend the portion of the code related to replacement of residential dwelling in non-agricultural and non-residential districts. The changes are proposed for section 13.1-4-.d of Land Development Ordinance of the City of Minot. That will turn it over to city staff for findings and report.
Thank you, Chairman Offerdahl, members of the commission. So really what this text amendment revolves around is those residential neighborhoods that fall within commercial zoning districts, where we do not want to see the residential use continue in perpetuity. We'd prefer to see the commercial and/or industrial use be adopted and the residential removed over time. This is effectively what this text amendment is addressing. So the way that this happened previously is, and I've talked about this to some planning commissioners, but the pyramidal zoning is when you allow less intense uses within any heavier intense district. And so that is where you find our single-family residential subdivisions within our industrial districts or right next to some interesting areas of town. That's no longer applied. And this is just an example of that, where we've got a myriad of single-family residential homes. What ends up happening is when they go to sell, list it for sale, and they've got a new buyer. It's clearly constructed for residential use, and it's not exactly on the radar of a commercial investor to come put a business in a residential structure and or use a detached garage or something for a commercial business. It ends up being problematic when it comes to a future transaction. And so what this ordinance is attempting to do is address this issue. I will also say that the state of North Dakota, through the past 3 bienniums, has attempted to address this in their own way, but is effectively prohibiting nonconforming use status. That is not best practice. In fact, I will go on record and say this proposal is not best practice, but it is a concession because I think staff is reading the tea leaves to know where things are going, and we're trying to address this and get in front of it and be as amenable as possible to recognize these circumstances that exist. Here's another example. It's just an apartment complex. This is even more modern, so this is not something that just affects those single family. It does affect multifamily. So previously, multifamily residential was permitted in our general commercial district. This would also apply to developments such as this. Not a lot in town, but there's enough to warrant staff taking initiative and addressing the issue. So I'll just kind of go over this. I did make some basic adjustments to the dwellings in residential and agricultural districts. I just added a few residential and agricultural districts. I think that was the intent, was to include all residential, not just limit it to, say, R1, R2, RM, in this subset of residential. It left some residential districts in this no man's land. So I'm just including all residential that are going to follow the same standard. So effectively, all legal nonconforming dwellings are able to be replaced, at least within the same footprint and design character, height, et cetera. We dealt with the case like this probably around this time last year for a garage or something. So anyway, this kind of just cleans up that. Dwellings in all other districts. So effectively copies a lot of the same language within that if it's damaged 50% or more, that they're able to rebuild ultimately within 1 year of the sustained damage. So if they're serious about replacing their residential structure that, say, is burned to the ground, But as long as they pull a permit within a year, they're going to be able to do so. And that's, in short, what all this says. So we want to make sure that if they're going to move forward with their aspirations to rebuild their residential structure, that they come into the office and rebuild within that 1 year period. Otherwise, use it or lose it and redevelop as a commercial property, and then there you go. So that, or get a rezone potentially. That apartment complex, if they came in and want to do an RM medium density residential development, that would align. So there's other paths forward than just developing strictly as commercial. But this puts a time frame on it. It provides the allowance for a property owner to say, you know what, if I can get insurance because I am able to rebuild. Again, we want to make sure that we don't have this lasting vested right with the property in a district that's non-conforming. We don't want to see single-family residential or certain types of residential surrounded by commercial developments. It's just not orderly planning, orderly development. And so we want to make sure that they want to rebuild, they have the ability to, but we also want them to be timely in their exercise of that right. And if they choose not to exercise that right, then that when they do redevelop, we expect it to be commercial and conforming to the commercial zoning district or industrial. So I've added a few conditions. So I think this is a timely change. We have gotten some inquiries, and like I said, it is to some degree a response to state initiatives to modify state law that would be more problematic. So I want to be able to show that the city of Minot is able to facilitate and utilize local control to solve the issues that they're proposing to address, with the stroke of a pen and cause potential issues. So to me, this is a very reasonable path forward that addresses the crux of the issue. So 2 modifications, because slam this together the day of the application is due, and we do have to submit our applications on the same due date as everybody else. So add language. So what I wanted to add is just relation to Article 11 flood protection. And so some of these replacement structures quite possibly could be located in a flood zone. And so we don't want to just replace that structure without at least complying with the requirements, FEMA requirements. And so that could put us at risk of losing our hard-earned status as being, so that's just something that needs to be added and incorporate the following language within the title. So one thing that came to mind is we do have districts that aren't RM, they're R3. So I want to make sure that I refer to the zoning equivalency table for all those other districts that we no longer use as far as their names, but they do exist out there in the community. And so effectively includes all associated districts per table 1.2 zoning equivalency table. So that shows the tie to all those other districts. So with those 2 modifications, should button up the original proposal that I wrote the day the application was due. So staff's recommending approval, and so I'll stand for any questions related to this.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Van Dyke, I'm just a little unclear. So you're looking to create commercial zones in which there's some single-family homes that are non-conforming, and that the future is commercial in these areas? Is that correct?
Chairman Offerdahl, Commissioner Kibler, so no, we're not creating districts with, so the point is these districts exist, these commercial districts with single-family residential structures and or other residential structures exist within the city of Minot. What this does is adds a 1-year provision that they're able to pull a building permit if it was destroyed, whereas right now they do not have the ability to come in and get that permit.
Oh,
But this is a relaxation of existing practice, a bit of a concession to state law proposals that have gone before the legislature over the last several years, trying to find an amenable path forward to, between, I would say, best practice and what's likely to just come about if the state changes the law. I'd like this to be a model as a compromise. And I think this does address the primary concerns of those residential units within our commercial districts to allow them to rebuild. And
Thank you.
we're just addressing a concern that I think inevitably we're going to have to address. It's either we can show that we're fixing their obvious issue, because they've brought it up, I think, 3 times now over the last 6 years, or we wait for them to fix it, and then it's not at all what we're hoping it to be. And so I'd like to show some initiative from the city level that we're addressing these things. Brian, did you have
Yeah,
something?
Mr. Chairman, just want to take it one step further and let the commission know that this would not impact an industrial use or a commercial use in a residential zone. Those uses would not be able to get permits to rebuild if they were to burn down. So this only affects residential uses in a commercial zone, not the vice versa. And that doesn't affect, it won't impact anybody in existing residential zones that have non-conforming commercial or industrial uses there, okay?
So this helps the homeowners make some remedy if their property is destroyed? Is that the?
Correct.
Thank you.
If they choose, yeah.
If they choose, yeah.
Gives them options. Any other questions for city staff? Okay, seeing none, open public hearing. Anybody wish to speak on behalf of this agenda item? Anybody wish to speak against this agenda item? Anybody wish to speak at all? Bueller? All right, we'll close the public hearing, turn it over to staff for a motion, or commissioners for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve based on findings and facts and staff recommendations.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion by Commissioner Holkalter and a second by Commissioner Pontanilli. Okay. Any discussion? All right, let's call the roll.
Domes,
Yes.
Hoggalter,
Yes.
Kibler,
Yes.
Longton,
Yes.
Minham,
Yes.
Offerdahl,
Yes.
and Pontanila.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 10, other business. Do we have anything on the other business?
Chairman Offerdahl, members of the commission, the only thing under other businesses, as we've gone through the item earlier with the, and I'm pleased that you came up with your own conclusion, just to remember the decorum, rules of decorum with regard to our recommendation includes the findings of fact. So all the rationale tied to why we came up with our recommendation. And so like, as we're going to present planning commission's recommendation, we still have to have corresponding findings of fact. So we're not going to revisit the case again to come up with what those findings of fact, that ship sailed. But moving forward, like, I absolutely want you to know we're not personally vested in necessarily the outcome. We provide our professional recommendation, and it doesn't hurt our feelings. We're leather skinned enough to handle that. But I want to make sure that from a procedural standpoint, we have that rationale documented so that if city council were to, because at this point, they're going to have to come up with a finding of fact to concur with planning commission's recommendation, because obviously it's the recommendation's counter to staff's, but we're not sure which finding. I can presume which one it is, but we don't have it on the record, and that's really what's important to make it absolutely clear which finding of fact of those 4 evaluative criteria it didn't meet. And then that's what's presented to city council, and they can concur or not. But at this point, I think they're going to have to come up with which one of the 4 that it aligns with, and then it creates more discussion. So it's better if a counter to ours, if you point out those evaluative criteria, which one did we, our recommendation just doesn't cut it. That's not what you agree with. This is the one. Just point that out as part of your motion, and then I'll move forward. So I think it's more indicative on probably more of a failure of training on staff's part for Planning Commission. And I do think that we need to get more in touch with and probably hold like a once or twice annual like training just to kind of go over some of these things, just to help all of you out with regard to this procedural stuff, because I know how nuanced and specific, and of course I've interjected a few times, like, did you mean this too? Because it does matter. It matters when it matters, right? It matters when there's appeals. It matters when it goes before a court. If this is not all buttoned up, it seems silly, but it just does matter. And so that's the only reason that we kind of point out. I can hear what everybody's saying, kind of, I know what they're saying, but we need to have it on the record, and it's just very different than just assuming anything. So I think maybe what we'll do is we do have a Planning Commission training coming up, I think in November, December, that's provided through North Dakota Planning Association. I'd highly recommend. You may have attended it previously, but the annual refresher is good because some of the stuff is just so nuanced, and it's always good to have that refresher. So I'll make sure to share that. But also, if you're starving for some additional training opportunities, please reach out. I'll try to get you in touch with some, or maybe it's really just time for staff to be able to provide that directly to you and just kind of go over some basic stuff. It wouldn't be city business, but it would just be a training opportunity, and I think it would be really helpful. So I think that's the only thing for other business. And
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I have one other thing. In September, because of the Labor Day holiday, our meeting will be on a Wednesday night, not on Tuesday. Okay? That's all I have.
Yeah,
Again,
Mr.
that decorum is agenda item number 3 every month that you can review, when we get the packets. I believe that's a PDF that you can reread, but it is nice to refresh, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Van Dyke, I guess I think that's a great idea, particularly when we deny a motion or request that we should have a warrant for it and be able to articulate the reasons why. At the same time, and I suppose we'll go through this during some sort of training, there's the letter and the spirit of the law, of policy, et cetera. And I'd like to think that as a committee, we're not bound to the compliance exclusively to the tenets of a policy, because there are mitigating factors like people. I think about the building construction here, where I think we should have had a list of reasons why we denied the motion to construct. But that's what we're here for, isn't it? To also determine the sort of nuances and spirit of the law rather than just the compliance with policy.
Chairman Offerdahl, Commissioner Kimmler, absolutely in line with law.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other business? Okay, seeing that, meeting adjourned.